Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're trying to climb to 2200 rapid elo while explaining my thought process as best as I can for your education and entertainment. Today my opponent opens with the London system, well, the Jobava London, I guess, with the immediate bishop to f4. And this is actually an opening that I would say I've come up with myself, which is Queen b6, well, c6 followed by Queen b6 against the accelerated London, I suppose you could call it. And the point is that c6, of course, we're preparing d5 in the future, like Caro Kann, Slav sort of esque. But we're also, by not playing d5 immediately and after bishop f4, I don't know, playing some normal London system, by going for c6, we open up the opportunity to go Queen b6 on move 2, so that if this bishop goes to f4 and vacates its defense of the b2 square, then we can go for a quick Queen b6 and force some kind of concession out of white, like pawn to b3. I have had it before where people have gone Queen c1 to defend the b2 pawn and completely hang the d4 pawn. I have had that before, and I'm sure that if you guys get this, you'll probably have that as well. But I think this is a very good weapon against the London system because, well, London system, Jobava London, whichever, I guess. So of course, there's many ways to play it for white. White could have started with knight f3, could have started with knight c3, and we get similar lines. I do have a few other videos on my channel in this Centurion system. And what I like to do is kind of delay the move d5. But we do also need to be aware of not allowing our opponent to play pawn to e4. Because, you know, if white gets e4, d4, even c4 as well, we're going to be lacking a lot of space. So knight f6 obviously develops the knight, which is great, but also defends the e4 square, which is important. So let's play, I don't know, white plays a move like knight c3 here, preparing a move like e4, then maybe we go d5 in that position. And, you know, this knight is kind of weak, the c-pawn can't move, the e-pawn's only going to go to e3, which isn't the end of the world, and I would say that we have a very comfortable position there. My opponent goes knight to f3, and we have options. We could even go for a move like knight d5, just immediately going after the bishop and asking it what it's going to do. Feels slightly unnecessary to me. I feel like d5, bishop f5 makes more sense. Although a move like knight to e4 is also tempting. I think I'm going to go d5. We can always go knight e4 in the future. Even if white puts the knight on c3 or on d2, we can still go knight e4, and maybe a trade is good for us. Or maybe we can put the bishop on f5 first and then go knight e4, so we could take with the bishop to avoid doubling the pawns. And I just think we have a comfortable position, to be honest. Again, we don't want to allow e4. c4 isn't the end of the world, particularly because we're going to play bishop f5 here. So if c4, we can just go e6, build this very strong central pawn chain. And it's kind of like a Caro Kann in many ways. We may well go for c5 in the future. And it's kind of like an advanced Caro Kann, but white's e-pawn isn't on e5. It'll probably go to e3. So not quite the same, but in many ways similar. Caro Kann, Slav-esque. And what's great about this position is that we get the bishop to f5, and then we get to shut off the pawn chain with e6. And one of the things that can make playing bishop f5 difficult in openings like the Slav is because white often gets to go for a move like Queen b3 in response to bishop f5, with like this pawn on c3 and this pawn on b2, let's say, or the pawn on c4, and try to target our b7 pawn to punish us for moving our bishop out. And that's effectively what we've done to white, but in reverse, right? By going bishop f4, you lose control of b2, and then we try to punish it with queen to b6. So it's the exact same concept. We also have ideas here of like knight a6, knight b4, going after the c2 square. I mean, I assume white can probably just go for a move like c3 or a3, and what is our knight really doing? I think it makes more sense to put the knight on d7, but I think I want to... Do I want to start with that? No, I want to start with knight bd7. And then if bishop d3... I know it's often an idea in the London to allow this doubling of the pawns. And then I guess play for e4. I'm sure that's an idea. I don't think I need to be particularly concerned about it, to be honest. Like, I mean, we also have the option of going e6 and offering the trade on f5 to clamp down on the e4 square, whack a knight on e4. Considering the weakness of c3 because of this move b3, that is very tempting, actually. Because if knight c3 gets played and the queen has to go to c1... I mean, it's not the end of the world for white, but it's uncomfortable. Okay, pawn c4. Alright then. Game on. Let's go e6. Bishop b4, knight e4 ideas look strong. If white takes, we can just take back. And if white goes pawn c5. Queen a5 is interesting. I don't think sacrifices make sense. Bishop takes, pawn takes, knight takes. We get decent control of d3, but just bishop e2 in castles, and what are we really doing? Queen a5, pawn a3. Preparing pawn b4. Don't love that. Maybe it's easier to go queen d8 and pawn b6. I think so. Because we have really good pressure on the c5 pawn already, with the knight and the bishop teaming up. Also, the bishop can't challenge us on d3. It can only go to e2. If white plays something like, let's say, pawn b4 to support c5, pawn a5, pawn a3, pawn b6, queen a4 targeting c6 is maybe annoying. Although there might be some lines where we can go b5 with tempo on the queen and then either take or push a4 ourselves or leave the tension. But maybe we don't want to allow white to go pawn a4. It's interesting though. It's interesting. I would say that this is a relatively equal looking position. I don't know. In this position, maybe c5 was stronger to stop white from going c5. Maybe a move like knight e4 was strong. Maybe. He does go b4. Okay. Okay, so b6 doesn't actually threaten anything because white can just take back. We may be able to overextend the white pieces with a move like pawn e5. I'm half tempted to go queen h5. Sorry, knight h5 to target the bishop, but the bishop can always go to d6? Well, no, and we just take it. Yeah. Maybe bishop e5 is interesting, though, because if we take it, like knight h5, bishop e5, take and take, our knight is trapped. Because f6, we can't go back there, so probably not correct to do that. Pawn f5, pawn a3, take. Rook takes, queen takes. I'm not thrilled by that, to be honest. I'm not sure knight e4 really accomplishes anything. Might be simple just to get castled, which I think is what I'm leaning towards. Although playing for e5 does look interesting. Does. Maybe even f6 e5. Like, I don't know, knight e4. Well, if bishop e2, then knight c3. Knight e4, bishop e4. That does allow bishop d3, though. So maybe I shouldn't do that. Because I'm giving this knight a reason to move. And this knight wants to go to f3 anyway. Like, it's not a very good knight on d2. b3 isn't particularly special. Although, I don't know, maybe it supports the a5 square. If a5, a3, do we have any other options? We can leave the tension, I suppose. Can leave the tension. Again, b6. We're not actually threatening anything. I feel like it's easier just to get castled, because then if we open up the A file with something like a5, a3, take, maybe we can use our rooks to try to dominate the A file or something. I do think e5 is a very important idea to go for, though. Okay, maybe now knight e4 makes more sense, because this bishop's already moved. I mean, maybe we can even go bishop f6 and pawn e5, although we do have to be aware of bishop d6. But if we castle first, then bishop d6 can be met with rook to e8, and that just supports our e5 push, which is nice. So, yeah. Hopefully you are enjoying the video so far. And if you are, and hopefully you're also learning a good bit, then please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. And, yeah, I think that maybe we've made too big of a concession on the queen side, but I can't believe that taking on c4 was the right option when white went pawn c4. Because, I mean, we just give up our control of the e4 square. That can't be good. We can also consider taking with the pawn, but it feels a bit silly. Blocking off our bishop, giving ourselves double pawns for no reason. We can even consider f6, e5, maybe, but I think it makes more sense to do something like castles, bishop f6, and rook e8. I think that makes a lot of sense. If white challenges my bishop with bishop to d3... Ah, he doesn't, okay. Is b5 an issue? I don't know. Pawn f6, pawn e5 is interesting, but I don't really have enough support for that right now. My bishop has to move regardless to allow the rook to get involved. So I think I'm just going to do this. And white might whack a knight on e5, but maybe then I can go f6 and force a decision. And if, like, knight back to f3, maybe I can go take in pawn e5 and undermine the c5 pawn in some manner by going after the d4 pawn. Okay, knight back to d2. That's odd. I'm not sure what the knight does there. Maybe white wants to go f3, e4, but I can't say I'm particularly concerned about that, to be honest. He also ensures that he can't go bishop d3 anytime soon because he's disconnected his queen from the d3 square. Yeah, putting the knight back on f3 might be the best move, but it's certainly a waste of time. I don't think he achieved anything by removing my bishop from e4. So now we're just going to get e5 in. And again, I am aware the bishop can go to d6, but by getting castled already, the bishop on d6 isn't that big a deal because it's not stopping me from castling. Like, if I were to have gone bishop f6 in this position, then bishop d6 would be incredibly annoying because, well, it's controlling f8. I can't castle. I'd have to bring my bishop back or something like that. And then probably the bishop retreats, and then we have to start all over again. So I believe we probably have to go for this way of doing it. But yeah, this knight d2, knight f3 maneuver can't have been that good. And yeah, white gets b5 in, but that weakens the c5 pawn. And c6 is defended well enough. So I think e5 is the best move. If white takes, then c5 is very hard to defend. Very, very hard to defend. If white doesn't take and retreats the bishop, let's say, well, this diagonal is concerning for sure. There may be tactics of taking on c5 to open it up in the future. But also, like, I don't know, bishop g3, take. The bishop is weak. The rook is weak. d4 is weak. c5 is weak. It can't be that good. But I also don't have to take. If bishop g3, I could go pawn e4. I probably wouldn't because I'm blocking my own bishop, but I could do it. an opportune moment. For example, it would stop bishop to d3 if I left the pawn on e5, because then e4 would fork the pieces. So white wouldn't be able to challenge my bishop very easily. So bishop g3. We probably want to just keep... Ooh, that's an interesting move. If I taken, he taken, I taken, he takes. Yeah, that doesn't quite work. So we'll take back. Maybe this bishop can try and come over here, but I don't know. Queen a5, rook b8, something like that. Should be fine. I don't think it changes all that much about the position. That trade was probably going to happen regardless. Pawn b6 doesn't make sense because the pawn would be hanging in many, many ways. So that trade was always going to happen. I think maybe white could have kept the tension because I'm never really going to take him because after a takes, c6 is going to be an issue. And also my d5 pawn would be very weak. But it's probably not that big a deal. White arguably could have kept the tension, but yeah, it's probably about the same. But okay. Taking on e5 cannot be good. It just can't be good. So I think bishop g3 is probably forced to try to continue the fight. And then I need to decide what I want to do. I don't think there's an insane rush to decide what I'm going to do. Like, taking on d4 immediately can't be bad. Can't be bad, because the knight can't take. Oh no, the knight can take, actually, because if I take on c5, then c6 hangs. And I don't really want to give up the c6 pawn, because then d5 will be isolated. So that is interesting. I suppose I want him to take me. Yeah, although maybe it's the same outcome. Okay, he takes. I don't think it's the best line, but it's playable, I guess. Okay, let's take. Obviously, it relieves some pressure on c5, but that's only short term. Like, c5 is isolated, and it is going to be perennially weak. It's not going anywhere. If white can win c6, then, you know, my position probably collapses. But I don't really see how he wins c6 easily. Like, the bishop can try and come in this way, but I just probably won't allow it. Okay. Taking, I don't think makes sense, because it helps the queen get active. I think it's fine if we double our pawns, because it gives our king an escape square, so we don't have to worry about getting back ranked. So I'm also leaning towards the move queen to a5, targeting c5, putting pressure on a4. I think that makes a lot of sense. And also stopping him advancing a5 and going for something like queen a4 to target c6. So we're also marshalling this pawn a bit. You know, kind of maybe stopping a move like rook to b1 because of something like take, take, and take. And we go up a pawn. My rook is somewhat awkwardly placed on the e5 square, but I suppose if it goes to e6, it could defend c6 nicely if we want. Let's take back. Queen d4 is met with rook e4, and a4 is going to be a problem. c5 is going to be a problem. I don't think white can defend everything. I think we can still go for this sort of thing, to be fair. Yeah, I don't really see a reason not to. Rook e4 is just a good move. Now, I'm not sure where I want my other rook. That's not clear to me, because while a lot of you would have been tempted to go rook b8, and maybe that's okay, I just feel like it gives white play after rook fb1, because if I trade, I can't really take on c5 because of queen to b8 check, picking up the rook. Maybe I could put my king on h7 preemptively, but I don't know, it gives white a lot of counterplay. But, you know, the rook might want to go to c8 just to perform defensive duties. Maybe I win the c5 pawn, and I want the rook on c8 to support the c pawn pushing forward. I don't know. I don't know. It's difficult for me to say where I want to put that rook. However, I know this rook wants to go to e4, because there's a clear target on a4 and a clear target on c5. and we control the c4 square. So I think that one's a bit more obvious. And also, the rook on e5 is vulnerable, whereas on e4 it's well defended by a pawn. So I feel like that's the easier decision to make. And maybe we put a bit of time pressure on my opponent as well. Okay. Let me think. Okay, so we can go rook c4. Queen b3, queen c5, rook c4, queen c4, queen c4, dc4, rook c1, rook b8. You can't take because of mate. I can go rook to b4 myself. Pawn a5. It feels close to winning. I don't know. It's difficult to say. Maybe I should go rook a to e8 to prepare rook c4 followed by rook e to e4 to support the rook. And also put pressure on a4. That's interesting. So yeah, rook c4, queen here. I can take with the rook, actually. Oh yeah, I can take with the rook. Oh, that's fine then. That's fine. I assumed I had to take with the queen, but I don't. So I think I just go up a pawn with a pretty commanding position, because, I mean, a4 is still very weak, and probably the rook wants to come to b8 in these lines. Okay, queen to b2. So the queen controls b8. Now I do have the option of taking with the queen. But by going queen to b2 rather than b3, I also can take on a4 if I prefer. Which I think I'm more tempted by. Because the a pawn, I would say, is more dangerous than the c pawn. Because it's got a rook behind it already. I know that rook to b7 could be annoying. But my queen defends c6 and a7. If rook to a1... Queen b5... maybe? I don't know if I want to give him a passed pawn, though. Rook a1... queen c4? Maybe queen g4. Targeting d1. But still, queen b7 is an issue. I don't know. I mean, I have to take one of these pawns, clearly. I've got to take one of them. But I just feel like taking the a pawn makes more sense. Okay, the immediate queen b7. Okay. I wasn't so concerned about this, because now there's no rook a1. So, okay, where do we want to put our rook? I think my two moves are rook e8 or rook f8. Rook e8 gives access to e4, but the rook is vulnerable, whereas on f8 the rook is completely safe, but it doesn't participate as much in the game. I think rook e8. If queen d7, maybe rook b8. If queen c7, maybe rook b2. Although I have to be careful of perpetual checks using h3 and c8. Or d8 and... oh, we control h4. So yeah, it would be c8 and h3. So we have to be careful of perpetuals. So maybe if something like queen d7, rook b8, queen's... okay, retreats the queen. Well, that's what we love to see. We love that. Rook a1 is now potentially on the way. Push? No, pushing is wrong. Yeah, pushing is very wrong. Okay, what about rook e4? Preparing something. Giving a check, rook there, that's fine. There's no perpetual. The weak pawns are defended. Rook here, rook here. A7 is an issue. Rook E7? Rook here. Rook Queen here? I don't know. No, A5 can't. A5, Rook A1. Queen B4. If take, Rook C6. Rook B8, take. B3. Rook B6, take, push, and then we win. So that's interesting. Pawn A5. I think I'm going to go for it. I like that move. I like that move. And also, we just get the A-pawn rolling. We could always put the rook back on A8 if it makes sense. Okay, my opponent doubles up. Interesting. I think Queen C4 is a... Is it a no-brainer? No, there is Queen B6. Queen C4, Queen B6... He always takes on C6 with tempo on the rook, which I don't love. If we go rook E4, trying to go rook B4, the check isn't so much of a problem. Queen B7, that's the issue, I think, because if rook to B4, if you take, I mate you. If Queen C8, King H7, Queen H3, Rook H4, Queen D7. It's difficult to judge. Difficult to judge that. Again, this is the diagonal I need to be aware of for the perpetuals. Maybe I just go rook. Well, no, I can stop him from coming to B7, but he can always come to B6, which has the same effect. Queen C4, does that do anything? Maybe Queen E4, preparing to push and putting pressure on the rook. Queen E4, Queen B6, push, you can't take because I take the rook. If Rook B4, Queen C2, maybe. Pawn H3. Well, Pawn H3 means there's no perpetuals anymore. Does the Queen have access to H3? This is interesting. We're up a pawn, but it's difficult with the major pieces still on the board. I feel like Queen C4 is a good plan, but I don't know. Maybe Rook E4 is the way to go. I'm going to say Rook E4. It looks more natural to me. It looks more natural. My weak pawns are still defended. If Rook A1, Queen B4 is still a good move. If take, that looks winning. Rook A6. If Rook E6, then Rook B6, and I lose my extra pawn, so push. Although, actually, no, I can threaten mate with a move like Rook C4, so that's fine. I thought that wasn't that good a move. Because of this? Check here, there's no perpetual. If you take, I'll just... Well, if you take, I'll just mate you. I think that's a mistake. Yeah, and then I mate you. Beautiful. Beautiful. That was a very good game, I think. I think it was a good game. But yeah, that's the Centurion system. And I'm very, very happy with how we managed that middle game. I think E5 was a move we had to play, but I do think White could have maybe done a better job of preventing it. The whole knight D2, knight back to F3 maneuver definitely was wrong. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. And also the endgame technique hopefully was quite useful for you. And also, you know, we benefited so much from taking the bishop on g6 with the pawn to give ourselves some luft. The white king didn't have that, and that was really the downfall of the white position. But yeah, let's jump into the analysis and see what the computer has to say. Okay, so 80.1% accuracy for my opponent, 91.8 for us. And I'll take you through some of the ideas of the opening. So, like I said, against bishop f4, we can go for the immediate queen b6, as we did in the game. But after something like knight c3, let's say, I like to go for d5, and my opponent can transpose into a Caro Kann with e4, which I'm perfectly happy with. But if, again, like, you know, white goes for bishop f4, then, again, we can go for queen to b6. And we get a very, very similar position. I've had many games which have gone knight a4, queen a5, pawn c3, and something like pawn e6 or knight f6, and I've had this on the channel before. Very interesting positions, in my opinion. But my opponent goes for the immediate bishop f4. We go queen b6 and pawn b3. The best move is knight f3, just like allowing me to take. Taking isn't that good because we kind of get run over a little bit after knight bd2 and e4. E4 is the key move. So it's better just to not commit. Like knight f6, let's say knight bd2. Knight h5 is a strong move, but it's also a strange move. I think d5 is far more natural to play. And, you know, we still have good pressure. We can potentially take in the future. Or maybe white goes queen b3 to stop us. I don't know. But, yeah, my opponent goes for the immediate b3, which I think is the most common move I see. And then we just develop. Knight f6, knight f3, pawn d5, knight bd2. The engine does like knight h5 here. I saw these ideas, but I thought that knight b8 was annoying, because then our knight is just out of the game. Like, I don't know, pawn e3, we've got to drop the knight back. I guess it's not that big a deal. But bishop f5 is also fine. Pawn e3, knight bd7, pawn c4. And here, I think this was a critical moment. And I went e6, which is subpar. Best is knight h5. Which here I should have gone for, because now there's no bishop d6 or bishop b8. So it does make a lot of sense. I think it does make a lot of sense. And let's say, I don't know, bishop e5. I think I was slightly concerned that after take and take, we were in trouble, because our knight could get trapped. We do have g6 giving our knight a way out, though, which I did see, but I was like, it looks weird. But the engine also just likes white taking with the knight, so better is like pawn f6, kicking the bishop to like g3, and then going for e5, or knight takes, pawn takes, and then e5, maybe? No, g5. Okay. This is kind of Jobava-esque, in my opinion. But basically, e6 is subpar, because after c5, I do have to put the queen on d8. I wanted to go queen a5, but after the simple pawn a3, b4 is going to come with tempo. I can go queen c3 to be really cheeky. And if, like, rook to c1, I can go queen to b2. But, I mean, white doesn't really have to respond to queen c3. You can kind of just play normal moves. The computer even suggests bishop c7, cutting off the escape, which is pretty funny. But queen d8 is better, because b4 is going to happen no matter what. Bishop e7 is good. I considered knight h5, but I wasn't convinced by it, to be honest. Bishop e7, bishop e2, knight e4. Not the best move. Taking is good from white. Bishop e4. And I figured now if white goes bishop to d3, then that's fine. Engine likes castling here. And if white takes, and we go d takes, knight d2, then pawn a5, pawn a3. Pawn g. Okay, I'm not sure I'd be seeing pawn g5, I've got to admit. That's a very, very interesting move. Very cool looking move. But my opponent castles. We castle. Again, the engine wants g5. Kicking the bishop back. Then going h5 and on h4. gh. Oh, yeah, we just win the pawn, of course. So what? h3, g4. Knight d2, gh3, gh3, and we're fine. Interesting position. But I castle. Here, my opponent goes a4, rook e8, knight d2, which is the best move. Knight f3 is okay. Knight b3 is slightly better, which I thought he was going to go for. Bishop f6, pawn b5. But pawn e5 is a mistake. No way. The engine wants me to go bishop h5, which I did consider, actually. Because it wants me to take the knight. For example, in this position, the engine wants me to take the knight. And then go for the e5 plan. Immediately, actually. And if pawn takes... Ah, right. That's interesting. If bishop takes, I guess we take and then go for the same thing, right? With pawn a5. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Opposite color bishops. But yeah, so here pawn e5 is rushed. I need to go bishop h5 first. I thought white could go for a move like knight e5 maybe. But yeah, knight e5 isn't even that good. Engine suggests bishop d6 and then e5, which is interesting. So yeah, I don't know. e5 is a mistake, but why? So bc6 is fine. Knight e5 is a mistake. d5 is better. Why? So if we go knight e5, bishop e5, rook e5. This is what happened in the game, isn't it? Oh, wow. Okay, so this position is better for black. Unless white finds one specific idea. Can you find it? Can you find it? It's pawn f4. Hitting the rook. Forcing rook e3. And after pawn f5, my bishop is trapped. However, I have the counter shot, queen e7. Counterattacking this bishop. And after this bishop moves to a6... we go queen c5, setting up discoveries. The king has to go to h1. So my bishop is hanging this whole time. And then after rook a to e8, fg6, hg6, we... What's the material? 3 pawns for a bishop? Yeah, 3 pawns for a bishop. So we can play this, but it's weird. I've got 2 passed pawns here. My rooks dominate the e-file, but white has a bishop. But that's the only line for white. And he didn't find it. Knight e5. Here, bishop e5 is stronger. Because if d e5, then knight c5. And if bishop e5, we just take it. So if knight e5 here, my opponent... again, should go for the f4 line. It's the same variation. But he goes bishop d3. Which... I think is more natural. Pawn f4 is a hard move to play. Queen a5. Queen e7 is slightly stronger. But I liked queen a5 because we block this. I don't want queen a4 to happen in the future. And we put pressure on both the pawns. And the engine thinks this is equal. Slightly better for black. But damn is it hard for white to play this position. Here, for example, there's only one move for white that... keeps it below minus 0.5. Feel free to try and find it. But it's queen b3. And giving up the c5 pawn because you go queen b7. And after rook d8, you go rook ac1. And then, I guess, win the pawn back. But queen c2 is more natural. Just defending everything. But it's wrong. We go rook e4, which is... one of the best moves. Rook fc1 is inaccurate. Pawn g3 is the best. Again, a strange move to play. The engine also likes rook fb1, which I was kind of thinking made a lot of sense. But, you know, after rook c4, queen b3, you are just giving up c5 pawn. Like, and then you have to try and survive this position after queen b7, rook f8. You're not winning your pawn back. But the engine thinks it can hold on. From a human perspective, though, this is very difficult to hold for white. He goes rook fc1. Here, rook b8 is the best move, interestingly. But I chose rook c4, which is also fine. Queen b2. And here I have a choice. I either take on c5 with the rook, take on a4 with the rook, or take on c5 with the queen. I chose a4, and it's wrong. The best move is actually queen b4. And if take, then we dominate the b file, which makes sense. And I guess it's hard for white to do anything else other than rook cb1. And then a5. Oh, a5. That's the idea. That's very interesting. And I mean, if you take, this looks pretty bad. The only move to try and survive is a5. And then after rook c5, rook b4, rook a5, rook a5, rook a5. Oh, no, sorry, that hangs mate. So you can't even do that. So let's say rook d1. Rook here. And black is better. Although, you know, maybe white can draw it. I chose rook a4. Queen c5 is also strong, which makes sense. I was expecting white to go queen b3 in this position. And I didn't think queen c5 was good enough. After rook takes, queen takes, I thought it was very bad, which it is. But the point is actually pawn takes. And if the queen goes to b7, we go rook d8 and use the d file, which I didn't consider. But okay, rook a4, queen a4. Queen b7 is the only move to hold on. We go rook to e8. And it's really difficult for white to play this because the engine might say, oh, it's a draw. It's slightly better for black. Yeah, but your c5 pawn sucks, and I've got a passed a pawn. So the engine wants to create luft for the king, which I think is a very natural move to play. And then the game continues with something like queen a3, rook c2. Engine suggests just shuffling, which is ridiculous, obviously. I feel like I'd probably go for something more like rook e4. Or no, sorry, that blunders the perpetual. So, I don't know. It's difficult to say. But queen b2 is chosen by my opponent, trying to be defensive. We go pawn a5. Queen b5 is stronger. And after take, if the pawn pushes, we don't care. And if white does this, then we just go a6. And if white does this, we go rook a8. And if the pawn pushes, and pushes, then we're fine. Oh, because if you promote, that's cool. That's cool. But okay, rook b1 is played by my opponent, which is a mistake. And rook e4 is the best move. King h7 is also fine. Queen e4 is also fine. Both moves I considered, but rook e4 is the best because rook b4 is deadly because the white king still is stranded on the back rank. If white now tries to free his king, it's not really good enough. Like queen c1, rook b1, queen b4, and like, what can white do? Queen c2, and I just push. And there's too many weaknesses. And my king is completely safe now because I dominate the b file. My opponent chooses queen b6. We go rook b4. And I thought my opponent was going to go for this. And then move the rook, which is the best line to try and keep the game going. Still, after queen b5, black is completely winning. c5 is weak. The a pawn is going. Rook to b1 is happening. And there's no check. So, you know. My opponent took on b4 with the rook, of course, and we mate on d1. Interestingly, if something like queen b4, this is a draw after g3. Because if we take, the white pawn promotes, so we can't take. We can't push because our queen hangs. So this would be a draw, but we have mate on d1. And that was the whole idea. I think white should have played h3 or g3 far sooner, but it's easier to say that in retrospect. Like, you know, he was obviously very concerned about his c5 pawn and my a pawn advancing, which is very reasonable to be concerned about. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see another game where I play the Centurion system against the London, then check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of this climb to 2200 rapid, check out the playlist down there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.